Hello everybody, it's me, Riffraff Hornhelm, and I'm back again with another presentation from the Dwarven Vault. And today, we have a monster review. Now today's monster is the Bullywug. And for a change, no, it does not come from the monster manual, it comes from the Fiend Folio, which was a relatively early monster supplement. And when I say relatively early, once the books had started being published. This particular one came out roughly about a year, I think, a year and a half, something like that, after the DM's guide had come out. And in between these two is also deities and demigods. We'll be doing some stuff with that too, but not in this video. So this is from the original Fiend Folio. And most typically, this was used with first edition rules, or what were considered the full compendium of first edition rules that came out with the original books, starting with the Monster Manual and followed by the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide. So, the Bullywug. Well, the Bullywug is an interesting little one-hit dice creature. They're only 6 armor class, naturally, and essentially they kind of look like little humanoid frogs. Pretty neat. And they tend to come in rather large numbers. You know, you'll see these in dozens and dozens and dozens, possibly even hundreds. And they're not very large. They typically stand 1 to 2 feet tall. Though large bullywugs can be roughly the size of, say, a short human. So maybe a 5-foot tall human or something like that. You know, certainly no more than, you know, a meter and a third, or a meter and maybe a half. Not large creatures. And once again, they come in job lots. Now, there's nothing really special about them. They're only one-hit dice. They don't have any special magic resistance, and you can hit them with normal weapons. They aren't very smart. The best they're at is average intelligence. Most of them would be considered low intelligence. And they're chaotic evil. So, interesting creatures. Now, they have one specific trick, and that's their ability to camouflage in surrounding, you know, like a lot of reptiles are able to do, or specific reptiles are able to do. They're able to blend in exceptionally well with their surroundings. Now, these are really kind of a fun creature to use. When the Fiend Folio first came out, this was an awful lot of fun to be able to add into the game. It gave you a whole bunch of new monsters to use, which were official. Yes, you found things in the Dragon magazine, or in this case, the Fiend Folio came to us primarily out of the UK, but out of Europe. There are a few creatures in there that actually came from the US as well, that came from the TSR folks. But most of it was stuff that had been derived from a feature in a magazine called the, the Fiend Factory. So the Bullywug, being a small tribal evil creature, they hang out in swamps and in shallow underground caverns where there's wetness and where there's growing plant growth. It's important for them to have things to camouflage against that aren't just stone. They are not very nice. They like to attack, but they're creatures that will take advantage of a situation. They're not going to go up against anybody if they don't feel they have the overwhelming odds or situation that would allow them to win without too much difficulty. And really, they have a tribal arrangement, I guess, that they do use weapons. They do have some, shabby clothing, breech clouts, this kind of stuff. And if not, they attack with their claws and a bite. I think it's like 1 to 2 on each claw. So 2 claw attacks, 1 to 2 damage, and then 2 to 5 for their bite. Otherwise, it's by weapon type. these were used very well in some very early dungeons that came out as part of either magazines or were published at the time. And I think they're an awful lot of fun to use if you're a DM. But of course, because they are civilized, so to speak, yeah, some of them do wear armor and whatnot. One of the other small advantages they have is that they can swim as fast as they can move on land if they're not encumbered by things with like armor and weapons and whatnot. And there's different, I don't know if you want to say tribes or subspecies of bullywugs. I created some myself, but in the context of what they say in the rules, it's the differences that give you both a difference in size and also a difference in intelligence level. And, you know, that is really up to how the DM wants to play it on that side. These are great things to use in setting up a small society that's annoying as hell to a traveling party. Actually, can be pretty effective if the adventurers are not very high level, but just a ton of fun. Now, while they have their own rather primitive language that they use amongst each other, some of them can speak a few words of common here and there. They're not very good conversationalists on that side. In combat, they do have the ability to hop and do a hopping attack. And a hopping attack gives them added damage when they do make contact with the enemy, presumably because of the additional mass and the whole body being in motion and all that kind of good stuff. But they definitely can do more damage that way. Having said that, overall on land, they move slower than a human. So the hop is something that is great, but their vulnerability is they can't get away very fast, generally speaking. Get them in water, once again, as long as they're not encumbered by anything, they move as fast as a human does on land, which is pretty cool. Now, once again, damp areas, you know, do they get into caverns? Yeah, like on the edge of a river or something like that. It's got to be someplace that's wet because essentially they're like frogs. They have to keep the outside slimed. And the only way to do that is to make sure that they have constant access to water. So, us dwarves, if we run into bullywugs, oh yeah. Yeah, they're almost as fun to kick as kobolds. Now, mind you, they can be nasty if there's enough of them. But really, you know, this is something that, you know, us miscreant dwarf children did was look for bullywug enclaves and so forth and, you know, throw rocks at them and chase them around and stuff like that. I didn't say we were good kids. I just said we were children at that time, child dwarves. Oh well. But yes, we do run into them as dwarves on occasion. Not super common. It's more likely that you're going to run into them in like a marsh or a bog or something like that, which, you know, frankly for us dwarves is not a place we really enjoy going to. But in the adventuring world, well, what about it? We went out to our friends in the Greater Hornhelm community and asked them about the bullywug and said, hey, come on, DMs, what do you think of the bullywug? Everyone agreed that this was a fun creature to use. It was kind of a nice alternative to something like an orc or a kobold. They were low in hit points or low in intelligence. They weren't that difficult for a group to deal with, but they had some nice little twists. You know, the whole chameleon-like camouflage thing and the hopping attacks, and they thought it was an awful lot of fun. It gave a real nice alternative to something that people were, well, frankly, I don't want to say bored to death with, but were very used to seeing. So something other than an orc, a small, low-level evil creature, a lot of fun. So, well, that's great, but how did you rank it? They said, oh, you know, typical. 1, maybe 1.5. And to be honest, 1.5. 1.5 is probably generous. 1, maybe a half. Going to the players, they all said that they were a lot of fun to stomp on and fight with, and you know, they were different than an orc, and they ranked it between a 1 and a 2. Go figure. I mean, from a opponent standpoint, they're not very difficult. Though, like any other large tribal group, As it gets bigger, you pick up things like shamans and maybe a hero or a leader of some kind. They're going to have more hit dice. The shaman types will have some minor spells, either clerical or magical. I believe in this case it's clerical, or maybe even druidic, I'm not sure. But the bottom line is it's very minor stuff and very easy for both groups to deal with as long as they're not super low level. So, 1 to 2. 2 is a bit much, I think, but 1, yeah, I'm good with that. So a very interesting creature that, once again, comes to us from the Fiend Folio. Something a little bit different. If you've never investigated the Fiend Folio before, I would highly recommend you take a few minutes to look through it. It goes from the bizarre to the sublime. There's some really cool creatures in there. There's also some creatures that you kind of scratch your head about once you look at it. But it's definitely worth a read. So, that, my friends, is the Bullywug. We hope you found today's presentation to be interesting, educational, amusing, all that kind of good stuff. If you did, please be so kind as to leave us a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't. Definitely drop us a line, share with your friends, but by all means, please come back and see us again real soon. We thank you so much for your kind support. Take care, everyone, and remember, dwarves rock!